into the program, even the honors is only 3 years or
3
4
years as of now.
Oh, sorry.
As of now.
But it's going to be 4 years now.
I read in the papers. Now it is 3 years.
Now it's
But what is the difference now between honors and the regular thing? What is the difference?
And what should be the part of content for change? Last 30 to 40 years. Emerging areas, challenges, what economists talk about economy.
Because in some way 4 years is going to be different from what we have honors now. The number of specialized papers is being decreased and then other options are being included, for example, moral philosophy and environment and society, etc.
I mean, in the US, for example, up to BA, it's a liberal arts program.
That's right.
In the sense that people take it.
Principal, Shri College of Commerce, faculty members and students. On behalf of Shri College of Commerce, I extend a warm welcome to you all to the Shri Economic Summit 2013. First of all, I would request Dr. P.C. Jain to welcome Dr. C. Rangarajan with a token of gratitude. Shri Economic Summit is an endeavor, an initiative by the students of economics at Shri College of Commerce that aims at augmenting the understanding of economics taught in curriculum and as it prevails in the world around us. In its first edition, SRES seeks to address the current macroeconomic issues in India with the help of stalwarts from various fields of social sciences. Also, on this momentous occasion, we are privileged that Shri Sachin Pilot, Minister of Corporate Affairs, would like to convey his best wishes through a letter addressed to the academia converged hereby. Quoting him ad verbatim, I am glad to note that Shri College of Commerce is hosting Economics Summit during 8th and 9th February 2013 in Delhi. This initiative, taken up by the Economics Society and the Economics Department at Shri College of Commerce, has an innovative cause governing it. A cause that shall find these students broadening their understanding beyond the books and learning how the realms in economics affect this nation and its affairs. With an array of distinguished speakers lined up, I am certain that the cause shall be well supported. I highly appreciate the initiative and wish the Economic Society and the Economics Department the best in all its endeavors. May each one of you continue with initiatives that set us thinking, do us proud, and better the nation. Now, I would like to invite Professor Santosh Kumar, the chair of the session, to introduce the topic of the discussion and the speaker to the audience.
Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Rajanji and my colleagues here and the principal and students. The issue that we are going to discuss today in this session, that is capital flows, is quite relevant across the developed countries and particularly developing countries, because developing countries it is being perceived that the capital inflows is going to lift the level of investment. So in this context, I would like to just mention that there are two perspectives on the issue of capital flows. One perspective which feels that domestic investment is being subdued at lower level because of the lack of savings, and therefore it has to be added up by giving more freedom to the foreign capital so that the saving goes up, domestic investment also boosts up, and the overall economic growth rises. But on the other hand, we have another perspective which feels that the more opening up the economy towards the foreign capital also creates volatility in the economy, And the situation where your policy, economic policies becomes little dependent on the foreign capital inflows trend, and that's what we call the situation of impossible trinity. So given these two perspectives, we have to understand whether capital inflows is good or bad for the economy. In this context, this session is very relevant as Dr. Shri Rajan, who has a lot of experience in terms of policy makings, in terms of understanding on this open economy macroeconomics as well as closed economy macroeconomics. He would highlight the prognosis of the foreign capital inflows. I welcome.
Invite the Honorable Chief Guest of the occasion, Dr. Shri Rajan, to please come.
Dr. Jain, Mr. Bose, Mr. Santosh Kumar, and my young colleagues. It gives me very great pleasure to be in your midst this morning, to interact with young minds and young people is an exciting experience. I'm also happy that you are holding this economic summit. As students of economics, you must learn not only the discipline in terms of the theory and tools that are available, but also know how to apply the theory and tools to concrete problems faced by the people. And therefore appreciate your efforts to hold an economic summit in which you will discuss a variety of economic issues. I have been asked to speak this morning on capital flows and some implications for the economy. Capital flows are part of the external sector of the economy. The external sector of the Indian economy underwent a dramatic change in 1991. In my view, 1991 is an important landmark in the post-independent economic history of our country. The country faced an acute economic crisis triggered largely by a severe balance of payments problem. But the crisis was converted into an opportunity to bring about some fundamental changes in India's economic policy. There is a common thread running through the various measures introduced since June 1991. And that is to improve the productivity and efficiency of the system by injecting a greater element of competition in the system. While changes in industrial policy, such as the removal of licenses and controls, were aimed at improving the domestic competitiveness of Indian firms, the changes in the external sector and the foreign trade policy were aimed at improving the international competitiveness of the Indian firms. The reforms of the external sector fell under three categories. First, it related to the trade in goods and services. Import controls were removed, and the tariffs on imports were brought down steadily, step by step. So that was one set of reforms aimed at integrating the Indian economy with the rest of the world. The second set of reforms related to the exchange rate management. The exchange rate of the Indian rupee until 1991 or 92 was determined by the Reserve Bank of India every day. Now, it is possible to determine the exchange rate by an authority only if there are controls over the movement of the exchange. However, it was an administered system of exchange rate that we had prior to 1992. We moved away from it. First, we moved to a dual exchange rate system. And finally, in early 1993, we moved to a market-determined exchange rate system. So this is the second change that was made with respect to the external sector. And the third change was in respect of the capital flows. Before 1991, we had any number of restrictions on the movement of capital into the country. For example, foreign direct investment that we talk about today was almost negligible at that time because we did not allow at that time foreign direct investors to have a majority holding in the Indian firms. This completely dissuaded the foreign direct investors to come to India. In fact, in 1991, the total capital flows into the country was $7 billion, of which not even 1 billion, even less than that, was foreign direct investments. Bulk of it, as I will explain a little later, are all official assistance and borrowing. So, changes were made with respect to the export and import of goods and services, with respect to the exchange rate management and capital flows. Many people feared at that time that these changes would make India more vulnerable. But history has shown, and events have clearly indicated, that India's balance of payment situation has never been stronger than it has been since 92-93. We have been able to manage the current account of India's balance of payments very effectively. In fact, until recently, I will come to that point later, India's current account deficit remained very low. And there were years in which India's current account deficit was also in surplus. Capital flows are the means through which the current account deficit is met. As all of you know, the balance of payments has two parts. The upper part, as you may call it, deals with the current account. The current account describes the export and import of goods and services. In fact, as you must have seen or must have read in your books, the current account itself is divided into two parts. The first part is merchandise, the second part is invisible. Merchandise means goods, import and exports of goods. The second part is the import and exports of services. So the two together tell you on the credit side, export of goods and services, and on the debit side, the import of goods and services. If the import of goods and services is higher than the export of goods and services, then the country has a deficit. Well, emerging economies like India normally run a deficit. The capital account of the balance of payments indicates how the current account deficit is financed. In the good old days when gold standard was prevalent, if a country imported more than it exported, then the difference was met by sending out gold. That is, a surplus country will receive gold and the deficit country will send out gold because it has imported more than it has exported. But now that does not happen. But how do you finance a current account deficit? The financing of the current account deficit is done through capital flows. That is, either people from outside invest in India and therefore bring in the money, which fills the gap, or people or the entities in India borrow, or through other mechanisms. Therefore, or the portfolio investment, about which I shall talk later. So, the capital account of the balance of payments, which is the same thing as saying the capital flows, show how the current account deficit is financed. Capital flows are generally welcome in emerging economies. As I said, emerging economies normally incur current account deficit. Therefore, capital flows help to bridge the current account deficit and at the same time add to the resources of the country. As you all know, the investment rate of the country is equal to the domestic savings rate of the country plus the net inflow of resources from abroad. That is, the total investment of the country is made up of two components. One is the domestic savings and the other is the net inflow of resources from abroad. It is this net inflow of resources from abroad that we call as capital flows. Now, capital flows, as I said, are welcome in emerging economies. They add to productive capacity. They lead to the improvement of the functioning of the financial markets. They also become vehicles for transfer of technology and management. In some sense, capital flows are the mechanism through which the global savings are distributed among the various countries, depending upon which country is most productive. That is the purpose of the global financial markets. Now, what is a concern about capital flows? A reference was made in the introductory comments about the view on capital flows. Why then there are concerns about capital flows? There are two types of concerns about capital flows. One is size. There are occasions on which the capital flows may come in a big rush. Then they impose some problems on the economy. Then the other is the volatility of capital flows. Capital flows do not come steadily, and sometimes the capital flows are temporary. That is, they come in today and go out tomorrow. Sometimes it is described as hot money. And if that happens, then as you see, that the economy has to adjust itself twice. When the capital flows in, the economy has to adjust to it. And when the capital flow goes out, the economy has to adjust itself once again. And therefore, there is a cost to the economy. So the concern always is about the volatility of capital flows. Generally speaking, countries like capital flows which are long-term and which are permanent, and dislike and wants to discourage the flow of capital flows that are temporary and volatile, and as I said, may be described as hot money. What causes capital to flow from one country to another country? Therefore, when we talk about capital flows into India, then we are talking of India as a recipient country. But it comes from some other country. What makes the capital flow from one country to another country? One can talk about two types of factors: the push factor and the pull factor. The pull factor is the status of the recipient economy. If a country like India has a strong economic base, is growing strongly, then it attracts capital. That is a pull factor. Because the investors globally, find the country attractive, and therefore capital flows into the country. What is a push factor? The push factor is what is happening in the country in which the capital flows originate. They push the capital out. Why? They push the capital out, or the investors take the capital out only because that the rate of return in that country is not that attractive, or because of what we call risk aversion and so on. In some sense, when capital flows in, because of the pull factors, they tend to be more permanent, they tend to be less volatile. A dramatic change has happened globally in terms of capital flows. Private capital flows have increased enormously since the 1990s. Go back to 1991 in India. At that time, our current account deficit was 3.1% of the GDP. But that caused immense problems to the country because we were not able to finance that level of current account deficit. There were no givers. We wanted money to finance the current account deficit. We couldn't. We went to IMF. We went around all over the world in order to get the money or the resources to fill that gap. Things have changed dramatically. The capital flows in 1991 was $7 billion. Today, the capital flows are $70 billion. 10 times the increase. And world over also, that is, if you look at the capital flows to all emerging market economies, they have also increased by almost 10 times. By 2007, which is the peak of the good period, that is a year before the crisis, the total flow of capital flows into the emerging market was $700 billion. It went down next year quite substantially, but it has picked up, and as of a recent date, it has almost come back to the pre-crisis level. Therefore, I would say that while we talk about capital flows and some of the problems associated with it, we must not forget the fact that India is today able to stand on its own feet because of the operation of the global markets and the flow of capital into the country. If the capital markets were not operating and if the capital flows were not coming into the country, we would not have been able to finance this level of current account deficit without going to the international financial institutions. We need controls, I will come to that. But nevertheless, we should not forget the fact that it is the operation of the global markets and the flow of capital that have enabled countries like India to stand on their feet. I've been talking in general about capital flows. What are the forms in which the capital flows take shape? As far as India is concerned, there are 4 types. One is what we call the foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is the investment by the investors abroad in Indian firms above a particular level is treated as foreign direct investment. On this, as I told you earlier, there were a lot of restrictions prior to 1991. We were not willing to give majority control to the foreign direct investors. All that is gone now. In most of the manufacturing sectors, in most of the manufacturing industries, capital can come in and the investors, foreign investors can own up to 100% in many of the sectors. There are still some sectoral restrictions, as you know. For example, in insurance, it is not permitted beyond 25 or 26%. For example, when we opened up the foreign direct investment in retail, we have said up to 51% they can come in. Therefore, there are sectoral constraints, but by and large, the pre-1991 restriction of not giving a majority ownership is gone in most of the cases. So the first channel through which capital flows is foreign direct investment. The second channel is a portfolio capital, that is allowing the foreign institutional investors to invest in the shares through the Indian stock market. That is what we call the FII portfolio investment. They have been an important factor in structuring the Indian stock market now. Of course, they vary from year to year, but they have been very substantial in recent period, including in the current year. The third is the external commercial borrowing. That is, Indian entities are allowed to borrow from outside. It could be from the capital markets of other countries, or it could be from banks from other countries. Therefore, borrowing by Indian entities, corporate or otherwise, is a third source, external commercial borrowing. And the fourth one is the non-resident Indian deposits. Persons of Indian origin residing outside India can place deposits in the Indian banks, and that is what we call NRI deposits. These are the various forms through which capital can flow in a country. Now, as I said, countries generally prefer capital which is permanent and which is long-term. And that is why foreign direct investment is preferred. But the FII investment is also stable over a period of time. One individual FII may sell, but another FII could buy. Therefore, the total amount that flows into the country need not necessarily be of the order of a destabilizer. In the recent period, there was only 1 year, that was 2008, when there was a negative outflow. Otherwise, it has been a positive inflow, but the amount has been changing from year to year. So what are the policy issues with respect to capital flows? Let me make 2 quick points and then come back to discussing about what is the current situation and what do we need to do. In 2007-8, India had a large capital inflow. It was $100 billion. As I told you earlier, the current account, the capital inflows finance the current account deficit. If the capital inflow is larger than the current account deficit, then it goes to add to the reserves of the country. So that is how we built up a huge reserves in 2007-8, because we had a large capital inflow of $100 billion. When there are large capital inflows, the question arises as to how to handle it. When large capital inflows come into the country, you can just think in terms of supply and demand, what happens to the foreign exchange market? In the foreign exchange market, if more dollars are available than what is needed, then the value of the rupee goes up. It is appreciation. So one consequence of a large capital inflow is leading to the appreciation of the rupee. But however, if the central bank of the country intervenes and accumulates the reserves and prevents the appreciation of the rupee, then it leads to an increase in money supply, because the reserves go into the books of the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank of the country, then this leads to the increase in the money supply. But the central bank of the country can sterilize it. It can sterilize it by borrowing from the people equivalent to or to offset to some extent the increase in reserves. But that has a cost, because when the central bank borrows from the public, then it has to pay on it interest, and therefore that becomes a cost. Therefore, when there are large capital inflows, there are 3 ways in which the policymakers can deal with it. 1, let the flows come into the country which will freely, then it will lead to the appreciation of the rupee. Second, the exchange rate can be maintained at the same level, but this will lead to an increase in the reserves, and if they are not sterilized, it will lead to increase in money supply,